This Parsha podcast is dedicated in honor of my niece, Bracha Walby, who lives in Jerusalem and who got engaged this week. And I have to tell you, this is my niece, the daughter of my oldest brother, Eli. These are such wonderful people, such special people, people who took me under their wing when I was a young, mischievous teenager. And I think the fact that we're listening to this podcast right now and the fact that I had the privilege of producing 1,500 plus episodes, it wouldn't happen if not for this part of my family. And this is, please God, their fourth child to get engaged and please God to soon get married. I haven't gotten any details regarding the wedding dates. I would imagine it'll be in August time in Israel. I hope I will be able to join. But it's an incredible celebration for the extended Walby family. May the young couple build a beautiful life together and have a life of joy, of happiness, and of service of the Almighty, and make all of us really, really proud. So this episode, we are releasing it on Thursday night. We're actually recording it on Thursday night as well. I hustled over here after the festival we just had. Of course, today was Shavuos. Festival was wonderful. Typically, we try to release the episodes on Wednesday nights, but this week, Wednesday night, was the festival of Shavuos. So I actually didn't even record it before the festival. I'm here Thursday night. It's almost midnight, but I would take this seriously. I come to the Torch Center. It's 11:33 p.m. I'm going to sit down and record this week's Parsha podcast and release it, please God, really, really soon. But the festival is wonderful. I did something new this year. Typically we stay up the night of Shavuos. It's a very old tradition to stay up and to study Torah. The problem is that usually I take a nap the day before Shavuos. So, you could stay up a little bit, a little Red Bull or some Mountain Dew or some coffee. You can make it through the night and then daven Shachris, have the morning prayers at 6 or so. But this year I didn't nap and I was staying up and I was studying with my son Shlomo. And then I had the privilege of giving a class at 1 a.m. from 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. And then afterwards we continued studying my son Shlomo and I. And he was wonderful. Usually I can learn maybe an hour and then I get a little antsy. We got to schmooze a little bit, go see what they're giving out in the kitchen, maybe something to snack on. But he kept on pulling me back. He says, no, Abba, we have to learn. We're up the night now, not to chit chat. We're here to study Torah. But at 4 o'clock I was exhausted. So I said, let's go home. And we continued studying on the couch. And then I fell asleep. And then I went to Shachris in the morning. And it was delightful because I got to stay up the whole night basically till 4:15. And then, usually if you're up the whole night, you want to pray in the morning and you're a zombie and you can't pray and you're not following anything and you're just waiting for it to end and then you sleep till the afternoon. It's a disaster. So it goes to 4 o'clock, woke up at 9, and then I commented to someone, this is such a fascinating Torah reading. I don't recall ever hearing it because every year, of course, it's after a whole night of not sleeping. But the festival was wonderful. Now the festival's over. Hopefully we take some of the influence, some of the experience with us, but now down to the serious business of this week's Parsha podcast. And what a Parsha we have, Parshas Nasso. It's the longest Parsha in the Torah. And if you open up the Midrash, you find more commentary of the Midrash on this Parsha more than any other Parsha. And if you open up the Zohar, you find more commentary on this Parsha more than any other Parsha. And the reason for this is, we're told, because this Parsha is always read right after Shavuos. And Shavuos, everyone rekindles their love with Torah study. And we recall the events of Mount Sinai 3,300 plus years ago. And we remember this incredible love and bond that we have with the Almighty and His Torah. So everyone's psyched. Everyone's fired up to study lots and lots of Torah. So we have the longest Parsha with the most commentary, the Midrash and the Zohar. And we're all fired up now for this week's Parsha podcast. And we have 3 special segments for you. So let's begin. In chapter 5, we read about the banishment of those who are impure. It's only 4 verses. And we're told, God tells Moshe, tell the Jewish people, v'yishalchu min ha'machaneh, let them send out from the machaneh, from the camp, anyone who is a tsaru, anyone who has tsaras, or who has the impurity of being a zav, different type of impurity, or anyone who is impure because they came into contact with the dead. And Rashi tells us that there were actually 3 different camps. There's the camp of the Shekhinah, of the Divine Presence, and then there's the camp of the Levites surrounding the tabernacle, which is at the epicenter of the camp. And then there's the camp of the Israelites. And these 3 people, the Tzarua, the Zav, and someone who is impure because of contact with the dead, each one sent out to a different one of these camps. Someone who has Tsaras, well, they're sent out of all 3 camps, meaning the camp of the tabernacle, the camp of the Levites, and the camp of the Israelites. Someone who has the impurity called to be a Zav or a Zava, they're allowed to be in the Israelite camp, but they're sent out of 2. And finally, you have the 3rd group, someone who is impure because of contact with the dead. They are only barred from entering the innermost sanctums of the camp of God in the tabernacle itself. That's where they're barred, but they can actually enter into the Levite camp. So that's what they're told to do. You have to cleanse the camp, clean out all those people who are not supposed to be there because of their various degrees of impurity. And indeed, the verse tells us that's what they did. Vayasu came b'nei Israel. The Israelites followed the instructions and they sent out of the camp all of these 3 people, these 3 groups of people. This is very interesting. We have a camp. This is actually 3 different camps, and it has to be cleansed from the people who are not supposed to be there, and the Jewish people followed the instructions. Now, the commentaries all puzzle that this instruction, this should be told to us elsewhere. Rashi even notes that this doesn't belong over here. The tabernacle has been established for many parshios already, and it seems the instruction to remove the people who are not supposed to be in the camp, it seems misplaced over here in our Parsha. It should have been in the book of Leviticus, Parsha Shmini, at the time of the inauguration of the tabernacle. That's when the cleansing of the camp happened. Why are we told it over here? That's one of the questions that the commentaries puzzle over. But the question that we always ask here on the Parsha podcast is, what is this citation, this section? What is the relevance to us? This was a one-off event that happened thousands of years ago when they established the tabernacle and the camp was all oriented around the epicenter, the inner sanctums of the camp, the tabernacle. You have the Levites around that and the Israelites around that. And we're told that certain people are not allowed to be there because they're impure. What is the relevance for us? So, a few ideas. We're just getting warmed up here in this week's Parsha podcast. So we'll give a few different ideas. One of the commentaries notes that there are other people who are impure. For example, we talk about someone who has tsaras, someone who has the status of a zav, different type of impurity, someone who came into contact with the dead. But there's a 4th person that maybe should be included, and that's the Baal Keri, which is, again, a different class of impurity. How come they're not included in this banishment from the camp? So the commentaries tell us something very interesting, which may be a relevant lesson for us. These 3 people who are banished, 3 types of people, all of them have the characteristic that their impurity can bleed over and render other people impure. Their impurity is contagious. They can infect others. But the Baal Keri, which is again the 4th type of person who's impure, who is not banished from any camp, that person is impure, but cannot confer that impurity onwards. So I think this is a nice idea that we can take from this section of the Parsha, that there is a place for banishing people. But there's a specific criteria that is required before you banish someone from the camp. If someone is impure, that's not grounds to banish them. They're impure. So what? They're impure. That's a fixable problem. Why should you exclude them? Why should they be removed and ostracized and banished? That's not grounds for removal. Only if they're infecting others. Only then must they be banished. I recall hearing that the Chazon Ish, he's like the founder of the modern yeshiva community in Israel, he gave certain ground rules for when it would be proper to banish a student from the yeshiva. And he said something to this effect. He says, a yeshiva is a hospital. It's where people are given what they need to live and to endure. Who do you banish from a hospital? No one. How could you remove someone from the hospital? But if they are contagious, if they risk infecting others, that will be grounds to remove them. Someone who is impure, you got to keep them in the yeshiva. If they're impure and they're going to potentially confer that impurity onwards, that's a danger. They must be removed from the camp. So if we think about whatever camp we have, our family, our communities, our synagogues, our institutions, and there are undesirables there. There's people who just, they're not buying into the system. They're not contributing. They're not on board with what's happening. We keep them there. They're part of the community. They're part of the institution. They're part of the yeshiva. We don't banish them. The only way we are justified to do that is if they potentially can take their disenchantment and lack of engagement and pass that onward. One idea about this part of the Parsha, the banishment of those who are impure. But there's another idea. The Midrash says something fascinating about this section. This description of the banishment of someone who has saras, and someone who is a zav, and someone who is impure because they came into contact with the dead. This is a metaphor, says the Midrash, for a different type of banishment. The Jewish people, they're still at Sinai, but they're hopefully going to make their way towards the land of Canaan, towards the land of Israel. It's going to take some time, but eventually they're going to enter the land and conquer it and settle it. And that's the fulfillment of this dream. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they were all promised that their descendants will inherit the land. And that promise was actualized. It took hundreds of years, of course, but the Almighty kept his word. But if you know the story, the history, they were banished. And they were banished once, and they came back. And they were banished a second time, and they came back. The land of Israel has a capacity, or has at least a history, of banishing Jews. And says the Midrash, do you know why the land of Israel banished its Jewish inhabitants? This section of the Parsha tells us why. The Jewish people, they were sent into exile. They were expelled from the land because they were like someone who has saras, someone who is a zav, and someone who is impure because they came into contact with the dead. The Jewish people were in the camp of God. There is one land that's the camp of God, and that's the land of Israel. And that's the land that everyone coveted. Abraham wanted it, and Isaac and Jacob, and the nation endured hundreds of years of enslavement, of servitude, of oppression, solely because this is what it takes to acquire the land. And they leave, and it's 40 years in the wilderness. The whole Torah is effectively the story of trying to acquire the land of Israel. We know that Moshe is not going to be allowed to enter. And that's going to compel him to launch into an unprecedented prayer to have that decree annulled. Everyone wants to go to the land because this is God's land. And the Jewish people succeeded. And they were there for hundreds of years, but they were banished. And they came back and they were banished again. And some of us, most of us, almost, are back. And we hope this pattern does not repeat itself a third time. And the Midrash tells us that the reason why the people are banished from the camp of God is because they have these three maladies, these three impurities. They have tsaras, they have the impurity called zav, and the third impurity, which is to come into contact with the dead. Says the Midrash, these are symbolic. These are metaphors for the three cardinal sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. And if we don't want to be banished from God's camp, we should avoid these three categories, these three classes of transgressions. And the Midrash elaborates. Tsarua, someone who has tsaras, that's emblematic of idolatry. And zav, that impurity, that's emblematic of adultery and other similar crimes. And someone who comes in contact with the dead, that is symbolic of the dead. Well, God forbid, murder. Here we're told, you want to avoid banishment from God's camp, avoid these three triggers, these three contributors towards exile. And this is a callback to what we said a few weeks ago. We found in the commentaries, we're told that every land was given to humanity. The heavens, they're for God, but the land, God gave to humans. V'ha'aretz nasan levnei adam. God gave the land to humans. But there was one land. There's one parcel of land that God, so to speak, retained for himself. Ki li kol ha'aretz. This land, the land of Israel, is mine, God says. This is an exception to the general rule that the land God gave to humanity. So there's one land, one distinct land that's God's and it's not ours. And here we're told that God has certain ground rules, certain requirements to be there. You don't want to be banished. Avoid these three things. And this is similar to what we said a few weeks ago. This land is acquired in a different manner than all other lands. It's still God's. It's not ours. If it's human land, well, there are certain rules. You have a war, you buy the land, you make some sort of Louisiana purchase, you take it from the Indians. There's rules. There's a system for acquiring land. Once you acquire it, it's yours. This land is different. You acquire it with righteousness. And you avoid the causes for exile. And you have to cleanse it, just like the camp. The Israelite camp, it was cleansed from people who don't belong there. The land of Israel, Midrash tells us, you have to cleanse it from all sin. And specifically from these three categories of sin. Again, idolatry, adultery, and murder. And there are many things that fall under the rubric of these three transgressions. I'm reminded of an idea. My grandfather talks about this in his book. I believe he cites it from the Maharal. The Mishnah tells us that there are three things upon which the world stands. There are three qualities, three attributes that uphold the world and ensure its perpetuation. And they are Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. Torah, Avoda, service of God, and kindness. And my grandfather, best memory, writes that the three cardinal sins are the exact opposite of the three positive attributes that uphold the world. And he explains, well, Avodah Zara, which is service of the idol, idolatry, that's the opposite of service of God. That made sense. And kindness, well, that means to give. And what's the thing that you take? If you take the worst thing you could take from someone is to take their life. So kindness is the opposite of murder. And Torah, he explains, that's the opposite of all sexual crimes. And quotes the Rambam that illicit thoughts only enter a mind and a heart devoid of wisdom. We fill our mind with Torah, and that makes sure that our mind is not filled with all sorts of dangerous and, God forbid, promiscuous thoughts. So if we're told to cleanse the land from these three sins, the reverse of that, maybe a way to acquire the land, is with Torah, kindness, and service of God. You know, we're in the middle of a war now, and us supporters of Israel are enraged by the horrific double standard we see. No one cares about the 500,000 Syrians that were killed, or all the millions of Muslims that are butchered in Yemen and all sorts of other places. But when it happens, when the Jews do it, and of course they're not trying to do it, suddenly it's front page news. It seems like the whole world unites against Israel. People who are sworn enemies of each other, they only agree on one thing, the hatred of Israel. And it bothers us. Why can't we have a bit of acceptance? Why can't we have legitimacy? Israel has the most moral army in the world. They go to such great lengths to avoid civilian casualties. We're calling them civilians, but come on, we know. Every other nation of the world will be way more violent and way more indiscriminate if what happened to Israel happened to them. But Israel's targeted, and everyone's attacking them. And they did everything right. They followed the law. And they do whatever they can to make sure that the Muslims and the Arabs are represented. They've been giving Gaza electricity and water, everything. They provide it all for their enemies. Why can the world accept the Israeli sovereignty over this land? And I think this is the answer. The answer is that this land is acquired with a different system, a different criteria, a different methodology than any other land. And we want to avoid being expelled from the land. We want to avoid exile. We want to avoid instability in the land. We have to banish these three contaminations. That's how you acquire and earn the land. You banish those three, and you do the opposite, the Torah, the avodah, service of God, and the chesed, the kindness. That's how you acquire the land. It's still God's. And this is what he demands. We can't do with it as we please. This land is the most contested bit of land ever. And it's traded hands more times than any other land. And it will remain in a state of limbo, in flux. It will not stabilize until the nation realizes what it takes to acquire it. And we hope that happens really soon. But again, we see this idea in the Midrash, in our Parsha. And we saw it a few weeks ago in the previous Parsha. There are three attributes that cause exile. Correspondingly, there are three positive attributes that deepen and strengthen and stabilize our connection. Torah, avodah, chesed, Torah, study of Torah, service of God, and kindness from one person to another. That is the way this land is acquired. Not with armies, not with harried, skilled, glib, facile diplomats, not with UN resolutions, not even with irrigation and building out the economy. The way the land is truly acquired is by trying to persuade God that we are worthy of being inhabitants in his land. Segment number 1. Let's get to segment number 2. The Nazir. Fascinating. I look back at my notes. We spoke about this last year, the year before. The Nazir. Someone who voluntarily opts to become a Nazir and to refrain from wine, from haircuts, from coming into contact with the dead, typically for 30 days. And the Nazir is lauded in Scripture. He's holy. He's an ascetic. Famously, and we said this, I believe, on the rebroadcast episode, the verse starts off, chapter 6, verse 2, Ish o isha, a man or a woman, ki yafli, who does something wondrous. And the commentaries tell us, the Ibn Ezra tells us, the majority of the world, the billions of people in the world, their life is one that's dominated by their impulses, by their instincts, by their desires, by their whims. It is rare, says the Ibn Ezra, for a person to say, I want to restrain myself. I want to rein in my impulses. I want to overcome my desires. And that's something which is wondrous. Kiyafli, who does something wondrous. Because it's so rare. It's so extraordinary to find someone who's gonna think about, what should I do in life? What choices should I make? And what impulses should I try to overcome? The rest of the world is dominated. The majority of the world is dominated by impulse, by instinct. The Nazir is a wonder. Verse 7 of chapter 6 says that he has a crown of God upon his head. He's like a king. Everyone else is a serf, is a servant. Because they're just a marionette. They're a puppet in the hands of their impulses, their desires. They have a desire, they just obey. They're obedient to their desires. They're not in charge. They're not in control. But the Nazir, they're a master over their whims. They're in control. The world's full of masses of serfs who are subjected to their whims, but he has a crown on his head. My grandfather, best memory, pointed out he has a crown on his head. He uses his noggin. He is cerebrally oriented. He thinks. He doesn't just act upon his impulses. And it's an amazing thing. The Nazir is praised, is lauded. He's a wonder. But what did he do? For 30 days, he chose to live a more elevated life. To not come into contact with the dead, to not cut his hair, and to avoid drinking wine. How much of a commitment are we talking about? Yeah, a lot of people like the wine. They have a weakness maybe for some alcohol. Grab a few beers after work. Just a few shots to lubricate my mind. Just a quick l'chaim or two. And this person says, I want to overcome that. For 30 days. I'll see you in a month. What is it? Sober October? Sober October. Is that really a great accomplishment? The Torah is going to say, what a wonderful thing. What a wonder. Let's give him a crown on his head. He's in this rarefied category. Look at this person, the Nazir. What a hero. It's an amazing thing. What does it take for someone to become so wondrous? It's really not that much. A little bit, but not that much. We just celebrated Shavuos. Shavuos, that's the anniversary of the Sinai revelation. A nation experiences prophecy collectively as a people. They hear the Ten Commandments from God himself. And it's on Mount Sinai, the Sinai revelation. And all my children know, it's the most famous midrash. Why was Mount Sinai selected? All the mountains wanted the privilege of having this experience upon them. And the Midrash says that all the mountains were jockeying for this privilege to have the Torah given on them. And all the other mountains, they were all trying to show just how impressive and big and formidable they are. And thus to show that they have what it takes to be worthy of this. But Sinai was small and humble. And Sinai didn't believe that really it was worthy. And God said to Mount Sinai, you're small, you're humble. I'm choosing you. And I was always told that this Midrash, it's trying to highlight to us that what does it take to acquire Torah? It takes humility. Sinai was chosen because it was small. So here's a special Parsha podcast question. All the mountains in this Midrash, they're all fighting and jockeying and position themselves to be the one to receive the Torah. The big mountains, the broad mountains, the fearsome mountains, everyone wants the Torah upon them. And Mount Sinai, that's the mountain that ended up with the Torah upon it. You imagine it could have been, some other mountain. The Everest experience, K2, Annapurna. There's lots of other mountains that maybe could have served as the mountains for the Sinai revelation, ultimately was Mount Sinai. But here's the question. Everyone agrees it has to be a mountain. The only question is which mountain? And all the mountains are fighting. But why does it have to be a mountain? Why not on a valley or on a mesa, on an isthmus, in an island, on an archipelago, in the plains, in the straits, in a savanna? There's lots of other places where the Sinai revelation could have happened. And those are not options. It was going to be in a mountain. The only question is, which mountain? Is that an interesting question? Have you ever heard this question before? Was it worth me coming to the Torah Center now? It's after midnight. I'm here by myself. And I'm telling you this question. It's worth it, right? Why a mountain? Why does it have to be a mountain? That was the question I had on the Festival of Shavuos. And I suggested an answer. Tell me if you find this interesting or persuasive. Send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. It had to be in a mountain. And here's why. The festival has two different, or apparently different, names to it. Descriptions of what happened. In the prayers, we say, Zman Matan Torasenu. Shavuos, that's the time of the giving of the Torah. This is the day that God gave us the Torah. That's one description of this festival. A second description is it's the time of Kabbalas HaTorah, Kabbalat HaTorah, the acceptance of the Torah. So which is it? Is it the day of the giving of the Torah, meaning from God's perspective, He gave us the Torah? Or is it the day of our acceptance of the Torah? Both of those terms are used about the same day, the same event. Is it the time of the receiving or the giving of the Torah? And the answer is, it's both. This is a day of a touch point of heaven and earth. God tore open the heavens and came down to us. But it had to be on a mountain. We also have to ascend. We have to put in our part to go up the mountain a little bit, climb a little bit. The touch point of heaven and earth, the touch point of us, so to speak, and God, it has to be a bilateral effort. He's going to come down, so to speak, and we're going to go up. It has to be the mountain. We have to climb the mountain. And the mountains were all debating. How much will we need to climb? And ultimately, Sinai, the shortest one, prevailed. Yes, we need to climb the mountain, but it's only a short mountain. We have to do comparatively very little. We don't have to climb K2 or Everest. Just a small mountain. That's all it takes. God will do the lion's share. I was thinking that this may be the part of the lesson of the Nazir. He is being praised. He is so holy. Let's give him a crown on his head. It's such a wonderful thing, a wondrous thing. Look at this person. Wow, everyone else is just completely subjected and under the thumb of their Yetzer Hara. But he's holy. He's so extraordinary. Come on, it's a 30-day purge. After 30 days, he's drinking wine. What's the big deal? He climbed a mountain. It's a very, very small mountain, but that's enough. That's one perspective that I wanted to share with you about the Nazir. But more broadly, I want to talk perhaps a bit about the long-term impact of being a Nazir. If you think about it, he's doing a 30-day shred, a blitz for 30 days, and then he's going to go right back to the gym beam. He has a weakness for alcohol. And I have to say, it's not a weakness that I understand. I don't like drinking alcohol. I do it only if I'm absolutely forced to. And I don't understand the appeal. But I gather a lot of people do. It's a weakness people have. Not judging anyone. Everyone has their own challenges. The person has a weakness for alcohol. He wants to overcome it. Wants to gain back control, to be a king, to have a crown, to be in charge, to not be subjected to his desires. So 30 days with no wine. But then he goes back to it. So how do we understand this? If the person swore off forever, 12 steps, I'll never touch it again. I'll always remain an alcoholic. But I'm going to fight my whole life. That made sense to me. They're defeating their demons. But 30 days, then going back to it. How do we understand that? And of course, this is talking about the Nazir and wine. But every one of us, we all have our challenges. And it's a very useful discussion for us to have if we want to improve and to overcome whatever difficulties and tribulations that we may be facing. There's a system here. There's a system of the Nazir. And perhaps it can be illustrative for us in whatever challenges, whatever mountains we're trying to climb. So the first idea is that in Judaism, in the Torah philosophy, there's nothing that's immaterial. Everything matters. Suppose we have a Nazir. He wants to overcome his wine addiction, his wine weakness, his wine dependency. And he does 30 days. And he succeeds. And then he has a relapse. And he's completely the way he was before. Nothing changed. We may think, well, that was a failure. That didn't work. Got to try something else. Got to go to rehab. The Torah does not discount anything. Even if it doesn't last. The fact that you did 30 days is enormous and it's wondrous. And here is a crown. You're a hero. What an accomplishment. Any small step that a person takes, any word that a person utters, any thought that a person has, any minor action that a person takes to improve, it's cherished and it's valuable beyond anything that we can fathom. In the eyes of God, it's a wonder. But it doesn't last. We don't see permanent change. That's how humans think about it. The fact that there was a person who said, I want to improve, I want to overcome, ultimately, it didn't last. So what? It's still wondrous, and we still give that person a crown. The Midrash says something unbelievable. The verse in Song of Songs, chapter 4, verse 9, says that the Jewish people loved God with one of their eyes. You have two eyes. The Jewish people love God with one of their eyes. The Midrash says, at the Sinai revelation, the Jewish people were looking at God, so to speak, with one eye. But with the other eye, they were looking elsewhere. Specifically, they were already looking towards the golden calf. They already had maybe an out, They were bonding themselves to God, but there was already a carve out. They had something else planned, maybe a second love, a second relationship they wanted to pursue, if you know what I mean. And nevertheless, the fact that they did it, they had the sign of revelation, and they had this moment of a bond with God, that is worthy of tremendous celebration. We don't discount anything. And if someone does 30 days, and even if it doesn't endure at all, that's a wonderful accomplishment. But there's another way to look at this, another perspective. We saw this last week, that 30 days, that creates a pattern, it creates a habit. God, when he rested his Shekhinah, his divine presence amongst the Jewish people, he did it on the first day of Nisan. That's not the time to celebrate the change. It's not permanent until it's been a month. So habits, they get formed over the course of a month. But what does it look like? Someone accepts upon themselves to not drink wine for 30 days. They formed a habit, right? They've now overcome that. They've lived 30 days without indulging in their weakness. But what happens day 31? They go back to drinking. So how does this 30-day habit forming look? I think there's a deep idea here. When we talk about dependency, someone who has a weakness, the Yetzer Hara is controlling them in one area. Think of that as a Gordian knot. The knot is complex. It's multifaceted. It's multi-layered. And you want to overcome it. You want to uncoil it from you. If you do 30 days, you've gained some permanent degree of removal, of extrication from your demon. Now, the degree of entanglement may be so high that you can't tell the difference. 30 days later, you go back to drinking the wine, and there's no manifestation. There's no tangible reflection in your current behavior of those 30 days. And we may have thought that, well, you accomplished nothing. But the truth is, that 30-day hiatus, it changed you. You've uncoiled some of your dependency. Think of it like an accordion. You push it in, you pull it out. You push the spring a bit and you release it. Every time you do 30 days of some sort of habit that you want to acquire, or some sort of habit you want to kick, you're loosening and undoing some of the bonds of dependency that have held you down. And you know what? You may have to do multiple stints of 30 days. Maybe you need 100 rounds, because there are 100 different bonds that are holding you hostage. But each stint of 30 days is going to shave off some layer of dependency. And hopefully, please God, you'll remove the last cords of dependency, and you'll be forever freed from that albatross. But 30 days, it does accomplish a permanent change. It unwinds the bit of knot, just a little bit of the Gordian knot until you are completely freed from its tentacles. And that warrants a crown. That warrants a description of a wonder, of something extraordinary. And finally, brief segment number 3, chapter 7, verse 1. This is towards the end of the Parsha, when it talks about the completion of the Mishkan. It was on the day that Moshe finished to erect the Mishkan, and it's anointed, and it's sanctified, it's all ready to go, and we have the description of the gifts that the princes brought when the tabernacle was finally established and erected, and the 12 days and the 12 gifts, series of gifts that the princes brought. Now, in this verse, it talks about the building and the erecting of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and it gives Moshe all the credit. It was the day that Moshe finished to build, to establish, to erect the Mishkan. And Rashi asks the question, wait a minute. Who built the Mishkan? So yeah, of course, Moshe built it because he's in charge of everyone, the whole nation. But Bezalel, he was the foreman. And Ahaliav was his right-hand man, was his lieutenant. And they had an army of helpers. But who gets the credit? Moshe gets the credit. Why does Moshe get the credit? Moshe exclusively? It's the verse should have said it was when Bezalel and Ahaliav and all the helpers finished and Moshe, they finished it. Why does it pin all the work and the accomplishment on Moshe exclusively? And why does it omit and ignore the role that everyone else played? Bezalel, Ahaliav, and the volunteers that joined the effort. That's Rashi's question. And his answer is kind of puzzling. Moshe, he had some self-sacrifice. Moshe was moser nefesh for the tabernacle. Yes, Bezalel, Ahaliav, all those volunteers, they all worked on it. But Moshe, he had some self-sacrifice. He sacrificed himself for this effort. And therefore, ultimately, the credit goes 100% to him. That is what Rashi says. And on the same night of Shavuos, I was studying with my son Shlomo, I said to him, there's a problem with this Rashi. What's the problem with the Rashi? And he says, wait a minute. He absolutely nailed it. He said, only Moshe had self-sacrifice? Bezalel worked for months on end, day and night, making sure that everything was perfect? And that's not considered self-sacrifice? It seems like Rashi's telling us that only Moshe had self-sacrifice. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast recently, especially if you listen to the one I did on the other show, on the This Jewish Life podcast show, the episode titled 5 Fascinating Questions. I've been talking a lot about the different roles of Moshe versus Bezalel when it comes to building the tabernacle. Spoke about this last week as well. And to me, I think that this Rashi adds another piece to the puzzle to understand the difference between Bezalel and Moshe. Bezalel was perfectly suited to build the Mishkan. He had all the talents and all the abilities and all the gifts and all the requirements, gifted in every area of artisanship, of craftsmanship. He was perfectly suited to do the job. Bezalel was designed for this responsibility. And he had all the talents, all the tools, all the implements, all the skills to do it. Bezalel had the aptitude to do his job. Moshe, he was not designed for it. And he did it nonetheless. The definition of self-sacrifice, I want to postulate, I want to suggest, I want to posit. The definition of self-sacrifice is that when yourself, your collection of qualities, the repertoire, the arsenal, the quiver of all your abilities is oriented towards one thing, and because there is a need for the Almighty in some other area, you overcome that, and you don't say, it's not for me, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility, it's not my area of talent. That is the definition of self-sacrifice. We talked about Moshe as being the example of a Levite. The Levite, they're the person who they're the people, that's the quality, the attribute of saying, I don't care what particular talent I have, particular ability I have, particular skill and affinity and aptitude I have. Whatever God needs to get done, I am loyal to that cause. And perhaps we can suggest, I know this is kind of following up to some of the ideas that we talked about in the past. That is the definition of self-sacrifice. Bezalel worked just as hard as Moshe did in building the tabernacle. But his work was natural. This is what he was created to do. For this, he was created. The role, the responsibility he was assigned was perfectly suited for his talents. It did not demand self-sacrifice. For Moshe, he couldn't speak. He had limitations. He had a speech impediment. He was not designed to play the role that he played. And he did it nonetheless. And that, perhaps, is the definition of self-sacrifice. I appreciate that you are listening to this podcast this week. I know it's a shorter week. We typically release it on Wednesday night because just a few hours ago we had the Festival of Shavuos. We're releasing it. I'm recording it on Thursday night. I'm going to go now hustle to try to edit it quickly and release it pronto. I hope you enjoy this. Hope you had a wonderful Festival of Shavuos, an uplifting Festival of Shavuos, and you're able to take some of the inspiration with you throughout the rest of the year. Have a wonderful rest of your week. A sensational, uplifting, powerful, exciting, exuberant, and enriching Shabbos upcoming. And please, God, with help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week.